You know that moment when your whole world stops? When everything you thought you knew just disappears? That's exactly what happened to Grace Miller on a cold Tuesday night in October. Picture this. Grace is rushing through the emergency room doors, her 6-month-old baby Samuel burning with fever in her arms. His little body was so hot it scared her. His breathing was shallow, and those tiny lips were turning blue. Have you ever been so terrified that you couldn't even pray? That's where Grace was. "Please help me," she cried to the first nurse she saw. "Something's wrong with my baby." The next few minutes were pure chaos. Nurses running, machines beeping, voices shouting medical words Grace didn't understand. They took Samuel from her arms and placed him on a cold metal table. Grace watched helplessly as her baby's chest barely moved up and down. And then she heard the words that every mother fears. "We're losing him." Grace's knees gave out. She was about to lose the only person who mattered in her entire world. The only person who had never left her. But then a calm voice cut through all the panic, strong, confident. "Not on my watch." Dr. Michael stepped forward, and everything changed. His hands moved with incredible skill, working to save Samuel's life. Grace couldn't look away. This man was fighting for her baby like his own life depended on it. And you know what? After what felt like forever, Samuel took a deep breath, then another. Then he cried, the most beautiful sound Grace had ever heard. Dr. Michael had saved her baby's life. When their eyes met for the first time, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Something dangerous. Something that scared her almost as much as losing Samuel had. Gratitude? Yes. But something deeper than that. Something she tried to push away as she held her breathing, living baby close to her heart. That night, Grace went home knowing her son was alive. But she had no idea that the man who saved him was about to turn her whole world upside down. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And have you ever had a moment where a stranger changed your entire life? I read every single comment. 3 days later, Grace found herself back at the hospital. Now, she told herself it was just for Samuel's follow-up appointment. That's what any good mother would do, right? But deep down, and maybe you can relate to this, she was hoping to see Dr. Michael again. When she walked through those same emergency doors, her heart was racing. Not from fear this time, but from something she didn't want to admit to herself. "Grace!" Dr. Michael appeared around the corner, and his face lit up when he saw Samuel in her arms. "How's our little fighter doing?" Our little fighter. Did you catch that? Grace sure did. "He's perfect," she said, and meant it. "Thanks to you." Dr. Michael's smile was tired, but genuine. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing toward Samuel. Grace nodded, and watched as this strong, confident doctor became gentle as silk, holding her baby like he was made of precious glass. "You saved his life," Grace whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." Michael looked up at her, and for a moment, the busy hospital around them just disappeared. "You don't need to thank me, Grace. Sometimes we meet people who matter. You and Samuel matter." Ladies, we've all been there, right? When someone says exactly what your heart needed to hear. But then Dr. Michael's expression changed. A shadow crossed his face, and he gently handed Samuel back to her. "I should go," he said quietly. "I have rounds." As Grace watched him walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was carrying some kind of pain, some kind of secret that made him pull back just when things felt real. She had no idea how right she was. Later that evening, Grace was giving Samuel his bath when her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door. "Mija," the older woman said, settling into Grace's tiny kitchen. "You look different, happier." Grace blushed. "Samuel's healthy. Of course I'm happy." Mrs. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. She'd raised 5 children and knew that look. "This is about more than the baby, isn't it?" And that's when Grace broke down. She told Mrs. Rodriguez about Dr. Michael, about how he'd fought to save Samuel, about the way he looked at her like she actually mattered. "But I'm being silly," Grace said, wiping her eyes. "He's a doctor. I'm a waitress with a baby and more bills than money. We live in different worlds." Mrs. Rodriguez took Grace's hands. "Mija, sometimes the heart doesn't care about different worlds, but be careful. Men like that, they usually come with complications." Grace nodded, but her heart wasn't listening to warnings. It was too busy remembering the way Dr. Michael had said her name, the way he'd fought for her son. What Grace didn't know was that across town, Dr. Michael was lying awake in his expensive apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her too. And tomorrow, she was going to discover why that was more dangerous than she ever imagined. The next morning, Grace decided to do something that felt crazy, but necessary. She baked chocolate chip cookies, Samuel's favorite recipe, and wrapped them in a simple tin with a thank you note. You know that feeling when you're about to do something that might change everything? That was Grace, walking through the hospital lobby with sweaty palms and a racing heart. She asked the receptionist for Dr. Michael, and a few minutes later, there he was. But this time, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was the most beautiful woman Grace had ever seen, tall, elegant, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Grace made in 3 months. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, everything about her screamed money and class. The woman's hand was wrapped around Dr. Michael's arm like she owned him. Grace felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Here she was, a single mom with a homemade gift, face to face with what perfection looked like. "Grace," Dr. Michael said. And was it her imagination, or did he look uncomfortable? "This is Victoria. Victoria, this is Grace. She's the mother of the patient I told you about." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yes, the emergency case. How is the baby?" "He's fine," Grace managed to say. "Thanks to your Dr. Michael." "My fiancé," Victoria corrected smoothly. "We're getting married in the spring, aren't we, darling?" Fiancé. The word hit Grace like a physical blow. Dr. Michael's jaw tightened. "Victoria, I should—" "Actually," Victoria continued, her voice sweet as honey but sharp as glass, "Michael works such long hours. I barely see him anymore. All these late nights at the hospital." She looked directly at Grace. "I hope he hasn't been spending too much time on follow-up visits. We have a wedding to plan, too." Grace wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She thrust the cookie tin at Dr. Michael. "I just wanted to say thank you, again. I should go." She turned to leave, but heard Dr. Michael call her name. When she looked back, his eyes were full of something that looked like regret, or maybe apology. But it didn't matter. He belonged to someone else, someone who fit in his world. Grace practically ran to the parking lot, her face hot with shame. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have thought that a man like Dr. Michael could ever see her as more than just another patient's mother? At home, she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. At her tired eyes, her second-hand clothes, her calloused hands from working double shifts at the diner. "What were you thinking?" she whispered to her reflection. "He saves lives for a living. She's probably a lawyer or something. And you're you." But as Grace tucked Samuel into his crib that night, she couldn't get Dr. Michael's expression out of her mind. The way he'd looked at Victoria, there was no love there. It was duty, obligation. The way he'd looked at her, that was different. That felt real. Little did Grace know, 10 miles away, Dr. Michael was having the worst fight of his life with his father. "You will marry Victoria in the spring," Dr. Richard Westfield said, his voice cold and final. "This family has a reputation to maintain, a legacy to protect." "What if I don't love her?" Michael asked quietly. His father's laugh was bitter. "Love. Son, love doesn't pay for medical school. Love doesn't build hospitals. Love doesn't secure your future. You will marry Victoria, or you will lose everything. Your position, your inheritance, your career, everything." Michael stared out the window of his father's study and thought about Grace's smile, about the way she'd looked at her baby with such pure, fierce love, and he made a decision that would change everything. 2 weeks later, Grace was getting ready for her evening shift at the diner when someone knocked on her apartment door. She opened it, expecting Mrs. Rodriguez with her daily check-in. Instead, she found herself face to face with the last person she ever wanted to see again. Daniel, Samuel's father. The man who'd walked out the moment she told him she was pregnant. "Hello, Grace," he said, like he hadn't abandoned her when she needed him most, like he had every right to be standing there. "What do you want?" Grace's voice was barely steady. She was glad Samuel was napping in the bedroom. Daniel looked good, too good. Expensive suit, new car parked outside, the kind of confidence that comes with money. "I want to see my son." "Your son?" Grace's voice cracked. "You mean the son you called a mistake? The son you said would ruin your life? That son." "I was young, Grace, scared, but I've got my life together now. Good job, nice place. I can give him things you never could." Grace's blood turned to ice. "What are you really saying, Daniel?" He pulled out a business card, a lawyer's card. "I'm saying I want joint custody. My lawyer says I have a good case. You're a single mother, working minimum wage, living in—" He looked around dismissively. "This. Have you ever felt like the world was crumbling around you? That's exactly how Grace felt. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can, and I will, unless—" Daniel's smile was cruel. "Unless you make this easy. I'll give you money, Grace. Enough to get a better place, better clothes. All you have to do is share custody with his actual father." "Get out," Grace said, her voice stronger now. "Get out of my home." "You have 1 week to think about it," Daniel said, heading for the door. "After that, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." When he left, Grace collapsed on her couch and sobbed. She'd fought so hard to build a life for Samuel, worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, gave him all the love in the world. But love couldn't compete with money in a courtroom, and she knew it. The next day, Grace did something she swore she'd never do. She went back to the hospital, not for Samuel's health, but for her own desperate need to see the one person who'd ever made her feel like she mattered. She found Dr. Michael in the cafeteria, sitting alone with his coffee, looking exhausted. "Grace?" He stood up immediately. "Is Samuel okay?" "Samuel's fine," she said, trying not to cry. "I am not." And right there, in that busy hospital cafeteria, Grace told him everything. About Daniel coming back. About the custody threat. About how terrified she was of losing the only person who'd never left her. Dr. Michael listened without saying a word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What can I do?" he finally asked. "Tell me how to help, and I'll do it." "Why?" Grace whispered. "Why would you want to help me? You have your own life, your engagement, your perfect future." Dr. Michael leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because 3 years ago I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident. I couldn't save them, but I saved Samuel. And maybe I saved you too. I haven't felt alive in 3 years, Grace. Not until that night." Grace's breath caught. "Michael, I know I can't offer you what you deserve," he said quietly. "I'm trapped in a life I never chose. But I won't let anyone hurt you or Samuel. I promise you that." And in that moment, Grace realized something that terrified and thrilled her at the same time. She wasn't just grateful to Dr. Michael anymore. She was falling in love with him. But loving him might cost her everything. 1 week later, Grace sat in a lawyer's office that smelled like expensive leather and broken dreams. Daniel's lawyer was exactly what she'd expected. Smooth, confident, and cold. "Miss Miller," he said, sliding papers across the desk. "My client is offering you a generous settlement. Sign these papers agreeing to joint custody, and you'll receive $50,000. Refuse, and we go to court. And I'll be honest with you, courts tend to favor fathers who can provide financial stability." Grace stared at the papers. $50,000 was more money than she'd ever seen. It could change Samuel's life, but it would mean sharing her baby with the man who'd abandoned them both. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow," the lawyer replied. "After that, we file the petition." That evening, Grace sat in her small kitchen, staring at those papers. Samuel played quietly on his blanket, completely unaware that his entire future hung in the balance. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked and let herself in as always. "Mija, you look terrible. What's wrong?" Grace showed her the papers. Mrs. Rodriguez read them carefully, her expression growing darker with each line. "This man," she said finally, "he didn't want to be a father when it was hard. Now he wants to play daddy when it's convenient. What does your heart tell you?" "My heart tells me to run," Grace admitted, "but my brain says Samuel deserves more than I can give him." "And what does Dr. Michael say?" Grace looked up, startled. "How did you—" "Mija, I'm old, not blind. That man is in love with you. Anyone can see it." "It doesn't matter," Grace said miserably. "He's engaged to someone else, someone perfect." Mrs. Rodriguez snorted. "Perfect for who? His family or his heart?" Before Grace could answer, there was a knock at the door. Grace opened it to find Dr. Michael standing there, still in his scrubs, looking like he'd run all the way from the hospital. "Grace, I heard about the custody papers. Don't sign them." "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you don't give up." He stepped closer. "I meant what I said. I won't let anyone hurt you or Samuel. Michael, you don't understand. Daniel has money, lawyers, everything I don't have. How can I fight that?" Dr. Michael took her hands in his. "Because you have something he'll never have. You have love. Real, honest, fierce love. And sometimes that's enough." Grace wanted to believe him, but fear was louder than hope. "What if it's not enough? What if I lose him?" "Then we fight together," Dr. Michael said simply. "I'll testify for you. I'll tell the court how you saved Samuel's life just as much as I did. How you never left his side. How you're the best mother I've ever seen." "Michael, if you do that, it could hurt your career, your engagement, your family." "Let me worry about my family," he said firmly. "Some things are worth fighting for, Grace. You and Samuel are worth fighting for." And right there, in her tiny apartment with Mrs. Rodriguez pretending not to watch, Dr. Michael cupped Grace's face in his hands. "I know I can't offer you everything," he said softly. "But I can offer you this. You will never fight alone again. Not while I'm breathing." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What about Victoria? Your engagement?" Dr. Michael's smile was sad but determined. "Some promises are made to be broken, especially the ones made for other people." The next morning, Grace walked into that lawyer's office with her head held high. "Miss Miller," the lawyer said smugly, "I trust you've made the right decision?" Grace placed the unsigned papers on his desk. "I have. See you in court." But as she walked out, her phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood run cold. "If you fight this, you'll lose everything, including the good doctor." Daniel knew about Dr. Michael, and he was about to use it against them both. The courtroom was packed. Grace sat at the defendant's table in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, her hands shaking as she watched Daniel's expensive legal team set up their presentation. Daniel looked confident, successful, like he'd never doubted anything in his life. His lawyer had charts and graphs and financial statements proving why he could provide a better life for Samuel. Grace's lawyer was a young woman from legal aid who looked nervous but determined. The hearing began, and Daniel's lawyer painted a picture of Grace as an unstable, financially irresponsible single mother who couldn't provide for Samuel's future. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "Mr. Thompson is now in a position to offer his son stability, educational opportunities, and financial security that the mother simply cannot match." Then Daniel took the stand. "I made mistakes," he said, looking directly at the judge with practiced remorse. "I was young and scared when Grace told me she was pregnant. But I've grown up. I have a good job now, a stable home. I want to be the father Samuel deserves." Grace felt sick. He sounded so sincere, so reasonable. How could she compete with that? But then it was her turn to tell her story. Grace stood up on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom felt enormous, intimidating. But then she saw Mrs. Rodriguez in the back row, giving her an encouraging nod. "Your Honor," Grace began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't have much money. I know my apartment isn't fancy. But I have something money can't buy. I have love. I was there for every sleepless night when Samuel had colic. I was there when he took his first steps, said his first word. I was there when he almost died, and I will be there for every moment of his life that matters. Her voice grew stronger. Daniel wasn't there when Samuel needed surgery for a blocked tear duct. He wasn't there when Samuel had pneumonia and spent 3 days in the hospital. He wasn't there for any of it, but he wants custody now, after Samuel is healthy and happy and finally settled. Grace looked directly at Daniel. Being a father isn't about money, Your Honor. It's about showing up, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The courtroom was silent. Even Daniel's lawyer looked uncomfortable. But then Daniel's lawyer called his surprise witness. Your Honor, we'd like to call Victoria Whitfield to the stand. Grace's heart sank. Dr. Michael's fiancée walked to the witness stand looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Miss Whitfield, Daniel's lawyer began. You're engaged to Dr. Michael Westfield, are you not? I am, Victoria answered smoothly. And are you aware that Dr. Westfield has been spending significant time with Miss Miller? Victoria's smile was poison disguised as honey. Yes, I'm aware. Michael has always been dedicated to his patients, sometimes too dedicated. In your professional opinion, you are a practicing attorney. Do you believe Dr. Westfield's involvement with Miss Miller represents appropriate professional boundaries? Grace watched in horror as Victoria destroyed Dr. Michael's reputation with surgical precision. I believe my fiancé is a compassionate man who sometimes lets his emotions cloud his judgment, Victoria said. His involvement with Miss Miller has been concerning. Just when Grace thought things couldn't get worse, the courtroom doors opened. Dr. Michael walked in, still in his scrubs, looking like he'd been running. Your Honor, he said, I apologize for being late. There was an emergency at the hospital. May I speak? The judge looked annoyed but nodded. Dr. Michael took the witness stand and looked directly at Grace. Your Honor, I've been a doctor for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of parents face medical crises with their children. I have never, and I mean never, seen a parent fight harder for their child than Grace Miller fought for Samuel. He turned to address the court. The night Samuel was brought to our emergency room, he was dying, literally dying. And while my medical team worked to save his life, Grace never left his side. She held him, talked to him, willed him to live. Her love kept that baby fighting until we could stabilize him. Dr. Michael's voice grew stronger. I've seen wealthy parents hire nannies to deal with sick children. I've seen successful fathers disappear when medical bills pile up. But Grace? She worked double shifts to pay for Samuel's medications. She slept in hospital chairs during his follow-up visits. She turned her entire life upside down to make sure he had everything he needed. He looked directly at Daniel. Where were you during any of that? Daniel's confident facade cracked. Dr. Michael continued. Your Honor, being a parent isn't about what you can buy. It's about who you become for your child. Grace became everything Samuel needed her to be. That's not just motherhood. That's heroism. Victoria stood up. Your Honor, Dr. Westfield is clearly emotionally compromised. Sit down, Victoria, Dr. Michael said without looking at her. I'm not your fiancé anymore. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Victoria's face went white. Dr. Michael turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I'm not here as Miss Miller's doctor. I'm here as someone who loves her, and loves that little boy. I'm here as someone who wants to help her give Samuel the best life possible. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is a signed affidavit from my bank. I'm establishing a trust fund for Samuel's education and medical needs. But more than that, I'm offering to be part of this family. Not because Grace needs financial help, but because Samuel deserves to know what it means to have a father who chooses to stay. Grace was crying openly now. She'd never expected this, never dreamed someone would fight for her and Samuel this hard. The judge called for a recess to review all the testimony. During the break, Grace found Dr. Michael in the hallway. Michael, she whispered. You didn't have to do that. You've lost everything. Your engagement, probably your family's support. He cupped her face gently. Grace, I lost everything important 3 years ago when my wife and daughter died. What I found with you and Samuel, that's not losing everything. That's finding everything. But Victoria, your father, my father will disown me, Dr. Michael said calmly. Victoria will probably sue me for breach of promise. I might lose my position at the hospital. But you know what I won't lose? Grace shook her head. The chance to wake up every morning knowing I'm exactly where I belong. With you, with Samuel, building something real instead of living someone else's perfect life. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, the judge began. The court finds that while Mr. Thompson has the financial means to support his son, he has not demonstrated the consistent commitment that effective parenting requires. Grace held her breath. However, the court also recognizes that children benefit from having loving, stable influences in their lives. Therefore, the court awards primary custody to Miss Miller, with supervised visitation rights to Mr. Thompson, contingent on his completion of parenting classes and consistent involvement over the next 6 months. Grace collapsed in relief. She'd won. Samuel would stay with her. The judge continued. Furthermore, the court recognizes Dr. Westfield's commitment to this family and approves the establishment of the Educational Trust Fund. Outside the courthouse, Grace stood on the steps holding Samuel, with Dr. Michael's arm around her shoulders. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying happy tears, and even Grace's lawyer looked shocked at how well things had turned out. So, Dr. Michael said quietly, I guess I should probably ask properly. Grace Miller, will you marry me? I know I come with complications. I know this isn't how you pictured your life, but I love you. I love Samuel. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that some people are worth staying for. Grace looked at this man who'd given up everything for her and Samuel, who'd fought for them when no one else would. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. As Dr. Michael spun her around on those courthouse steps, Samuel laughing in her arms, Grace realized something amazing. Sometimes the person who saves your child's life ends up saving your whole world. 6 months later, Grace stood in the kitchen of their new house, nothing fancy but theirs, making breakfast while Dr. Michael got ready for work. Samuel sat in his high chair, babbling happily and throwing cereal on the floor. He's got good aim, Dr. Michael said, kissing Grace's cheek as he grabbed his coffee. Definitely gets that from you. Very funny, Grace laughed, wiping Samuel's face. Don't forget, your father is coming for dinner tonight. Dr. Michael's smile faltered slightly. His relationship with his family was still complicated. His father had eventually come around, mostly because he couldn't resist the idea of a grandchild. But it was still tense. It'll be fine, Grace said, reading his expression. Besides, Samuel has him wrapped around his little finger already. True, Dr. Michael agreed, scooping Samuel out of his high chair. What do you think, buddy? Ready to charm Grandpa again? Samuel giggled and clapped his hands. As Grace watched her husband, dance around the kitchen with Samuel, she thought about how much had changed in just 6 months. Dr. Michael had left his father's hospital and taken a position at the children's hospital across town. The pay was less, but the work was more meaningful. He came home happy instead of exhausted. Victoria had married someone else within 3 months. Apparently, her love was about as deep as Dr. Michael had suspected. Daniel had actually followed through with the parenting classes and visited Samuel twice a month. He was awkward and clearly still learning, but he was trying. That was something. And Grace? Grace had started taking business classes at the community college. Dr. Michael insisted she could do anything she set her mind to, and slowly, she was starting to believe him. I have to go, Dr. Michael said, handing Samuel back to Grace. But I love you both so much. We love you too, Grace said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him goodbye. As she watched him drive away, Grace bounced Samuel on her hip and whispered, You know what, baby boy? Sometimes the scariest nights lead to the most beautiful mornings. Samuel giggled as if he understood exactly what she meant. And maybe in his own way he did. If you love this story, hit that subscribe button because I have more incredible true stories about love that conquers everything. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unexpected way someone has changed your life? I read every single one.